your go-to resource for U.S. immigration insights. We provide clear immigration news and information. Our platform provides a network of licensed attorneys who can answer your questions and guide you through the process. From visas to green cards, asylums to citizenships, immigrationquestion.com helps you to network with immigration attorneys so that you can move forward with confidence. Sign up today or download the app. Free registration, limited time offer. Stay tuned. We go live in 30 seconds.
Hello, everyone. Oh, sorry, just a quick glitch there. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live webinar brought to you by immigrationquestion.com, a networking platform, meeting ground, and community where employers, professionals, and licensed immigration attorneys come together to exchange information, learn, and stay current on U.S. immigration developments. My name is Nikola Ristic, and I'll be your host for today's session, Strategies for Employers Facing Labor Shortages, Temporary and Permanent Visa Options. Across the United States, employers are facing persistent labor shortages that affect productivity, growth, and long-term planning. While immigration pathways can help address workforce gaps, navigating temporary and permanent visa options requires careful planning, strict compliance, and a clear understanding of evolving USCIS standards. Missteps in timing, documentation, or strategy can all lead to costly delays and operational disruptions. Today's discussion is designed to help employers, HR professionals, and business leaders better understand how immigration options can support workforce needs in a practical and compliant way. To guide us through this conversation, we are joined by attorney Mia Giacomazzi. Attorney Giacomazzi is a US-based immigration attorney who works very closely with employers, HR teams, and organizations alike who are navigating workforce planning and employment-based immigration matters. Her practice focuses on helping businesses align hiring needs with immigration strategy while maintaining compliance in the rapidly changing regulatory environment. Attorney Giacomazzi, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me and inviting me back. It's always a pleasure coming and talking with immigrationquestion.com and your viewers in the live webinars.
Thanks so much. We're even more excited to have you here, Ms. Giacomazzi. Before we begin, a quick reminder, immigrationquestion.com is not a law firm. This platform serves as a public meeting ground where individuals can post any immigration questions they have, learn about immigration topics, and engage with licensed attorneys who participate independently. To everyone joining us from Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, or any other platform, welcome. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now would be a great time. Grab your notepads and let's get started. All right, Attorney Giacomazzi, to kick things off, many employers are experiencing...
Sorry, that's a great disclaimer. I would like to say the same for me is that while we're providing some general information, certainly, options differ person to person, case by case. So while the information that we're providing today is meant to help someone navigate their strategies or to consider options, they should certainly talk to a professional to see what's the right decision under their own specific circumstances.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So the first question that I'd love to ask you is about labor shortages. Now, Attorney Giacomazzi, many employers are experiencing persistent labor shortages across multiple industries. From your perspective, what immigration-based strategies are most commonly explored first and why?
Yeah, so there are specific visas that address certain labor shortages. So, for example, the U.S. Department of Labor has determined that there are certain sectors of our economy that just have constant labor shortages, and therefore, there are visa options for persons who fall into these categories that are fast tracked and are good options for people who are looking to hire in these industries that have significant labor shortages. And I'm talking specifically about physicians and nurses and physiotherapists. Um, there are ways in which you can get H-1B visas on a fast track if um, because of the persistent labor shortages in these areas and in these fields where um, there's just such a high demand, and the United States has decided that they are of national importance to fill the labor shortage. On the flip side, there are persistent labor shortages in other areas where it's a little bit more difficult to get into, because there are limits to these sorts of visas. And so, for example, um, in the construction industry, in the landscaping industry, in the hospitality industry, where you're looking for people to work in restaurants as cooks or in housekeeping, in hotels, particularly during peak seasons. The H-2B visa is a really good option um, to fill these labor shortages. But in addition to there being a labor shortage, there's also visa shortages and limits on the amount of visas that come in every year. So, um, there are good visa options, but then there are also some hurdles that are not insurmountable, but just something that legal strategies, do need to be put in place. As it relates to the agricultural sector, the H-2A visa works well there. Again, these types of employers are finding it difficult to find people to do this very labor intensive work. And there are not caps on H-2A visas, but there are other, considerations to take into place as it relates to, provision of housing, meals, transportation, and that sort of a thing. The real question begins with, what is the need for your business? Okay, you have a labor shortage, which means you in order to grow your business, you've identified now that there's no one locally in your area. There aren't any US workers who are willing, able, and qualified to fill the roles that you have open in your business to grow your business. And so you need to then look for a foreign labor workforce. And, the good news is there are plenty of different visas available depending on what it is, on what the specific need is. So the first thing is to really just identify, okay, what what is the job offer? What is the job opportunity that you have available, and then exploring what the best options are in terms of the short-term visas or the non-immigrant visas. How do we, fit how can we fill in the labor shortage that you have for your business to meet your needs? What are the best visa options? And we kind of just start from there, right? And there's H-1Bs for professionals, there's O-1s for outstanding people in their fields. There's TN visas for nationals of Canada and Mexico who are within specifically enumerated types of professions. There's L1 visas for, to transfer from international businesses to a US type of business. So there's a lot of, there's visas for, people who are religious figures called R visas. There's specific visas for Australians. So you go down what we call the alphabet soup of the visas to figure it out. But yeah, I mean, um, the in order to fill the there's the bigger question about labor shortages in the United States generally in certain demographics, but when you practice immigration law, you have one person in front of you, and that's the employer, and then the other person, which is the person who wants to be employed. And so it's always becomes a very personal question. And then the question is, what's the right visa for you at this time? And so it's a very personalized question, and it depends on lots of different factors and parameters. That's why we put all those qualifiers in when we first started this thing. Um, but usually it begins with, okay, either the employer has a strong candidate that they want to keep, and so we're looking for the best visa that will keep them in there. Or they have a specific role, like, okay, we are a landscaping business. We want to do lawn maintenance, and we can't find anyone to help us with that locally. What's the best way that you can help us build our workforce or maintain a stable workforce over multiple years? And then that's when we start to build an immigration program.
Absolutely. So, just to walk that back to you, it sounds to me like it varies significantly by industry, and based off of need and current existing government frameworks, you may be able to get people in through specific programs. I don't want to even take a stab at the alphabet soup here, but just overall, figure out exactly what your need is. Talk to a lawyer. There might be some pathways that are generally easier based on the profession, but in general, you're going to need to set up a more comprehensive plan.
Precisely. And that's the thing, is that you know you when you start working when you start your foray into hiring foreign labor and beginning an immigration program with your business. It really is the first idea is to start considering what are your temporary or non-immigrant visa options for a number of reasons, right? The first is maybe your need is just temporary. Maybe you just need to fill a temporary gap, and another reason might be because, you know, a permanent type of visa is a much longer commitment. It also is a much longer process. So, a lot of the times, employers will want to start, and maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, but um, they might want to first try the individual out to see sort of how they're working and whether they're a good fit for their company and their culture, and before wanting a more permanent relationship. But the first step really is the key opportunity is matching the business need to the right program and the right visa, rather than trying to force a one size fits all solution. And each visa type has a completely different process. It fits a different industry's needs. It has its own numerical limitations or none. Um, they have vastly different requirements. Um, and so, really, there isn't a one size fits all solution. And as you mentioned, it really depends on the industry, it depends on the skills required for the job, what the job opportunity is, where the job opportunity is located. So, for example, if you're trying to place a specialized nurse or a physician in New York City versus in a place where there's a higher need for those types of workers, then the process is different. And so you really, the first questions are really the who is it, what's your business model, what's the job opportunity, where is the job opportunity, and then from there start figuring out. But it's, when used intentionally, immigration becomes less of a hurdle and more of a workforce planning tool.
Mhm, mhm. All right. That makes a lot of sense to me. So the question of, is a temporary visa better or is a longer term visa better? That really gets answered by your specific business needs. And it's, you're not really going to be able to game the system, so to speak, in any sort of way. So it's really a case of natural fit. Um, and sort of building off of that, let's say that you're an employer and you want to get things moving, right? Let's say you'd love to have those longer term permanent options, but maybe you don't have the resources necessary, just the timeline isn't really available, and because of that, you're sort of, I don't want to say pushed, but you're leaning towards a temporary visa, right? So these temporary worker programs, a lot of the times they have these strict requirements, very strict timelines. What are these factors that employers should be considering to make sure that the short-term visa is actually going to work and that they're taking full advantage of it and getting the employees that they need?
Well, so just to put out there that most of my employers run the short term, or what we call non-immigrant visas, in parallel with the long-term visas. So, for example, they will have H-2B workers or H-1B workers who they will sponsor and keep them on those visas, and while, in the short term as they're non-immigrants, and then simultaneously in the background, um, have them, will have the process going for the longer term solution of a permanent resident visa, or the green card in the end. That, because that's just a much bigger benefit, the United States takes, you know a, a more detailed look at the applications, and the process is much more difficult and a slower process than the short-term visas. And so what ends up happening is um, that you really do them simultaneously. So it's never really, for me, a question of either or. It's, let's start with the short term visa or the non immigrant visa, get the person in here. And then once you've been able to test that person and decide that this person is a good person, who fits within your company's culture, and he or she is a good worker, and you'd like to continue employing them, then we also need to look, for example, if your business fits a year-round model or if it's only seasonal. If it's only seasonal, then it would be very difficult to hire or to sponsor someone for a year-long role. Um, but if your business can support it, and or can grow into it, then you can turn a non-immigrant employee into an immigrant employee. And so, and things change, but uh, um the considerations are, if the role is seasonal, project based, tied to a peak demand, temporary visas, makes sense. And that's all you really need. And sometimes the employees, I mean, I have employers who have employees who come in for like 9 to 10 months a year on short term visas every year, and have done so for 15 years in a row, and then go back to their home countries for 2 to 3 months a year, and then they come back again, and then they just keep reapplying every year. And they're happy with that, and with that arrangement, and it works, and then they just stay on this short-term visa for a long period of time. There are others who will come in on these short-term visas for 3 or 4 years, and then the employer says, hey, you know what, you've become a really integral part of our business. I'd like to sponsor you, and to have you and your family stay permanently in the United States, and I'd like to sponsor you now for an immigrant visa or a green card. Let's start that process. And employers who do that are really thinking about the turnover risk, training costs. Um, there's costs related to refiling for the short term visas year after year, or extending them versus just getting that person on the green card and then, only having to refile every 5 years or 10 years for a renewal versus going through this whole process after year. Um, and so the sophisticated employers, they know that this dual track planning, the temporary visas first with the permanent sponsorship started early, should be, on the top of mind when you start any immigration process, but there might be some that it makes sense to have a longer term visa, from the get go. And what's nice about some visas, like an H1B visa, like a skilled worker visa, is that you can have up to 6 years on an H1B. And so, which is, I would say, kind of semi-permanent, right? And then within, so long as you file for that person within the first, 5 years for a permanent residency, that then it can be extended, even beyond that. So some of these temporary visas can actually be extended for quite a longer period of time. But um, again, it goes back to the individual considerations of the employer and the employee. What's the role? Is it a supervisor role, a managerial role, a skilled trade, an engineer? Something where you are developing and you're spending time training this person and becoming reliant on this person to train others or to manage teams or to oversees certain parts of the operations of your business. In that case, of course, you want to reward that person um, through sponsorship, to garner loyalty, and to show that you have a commitment to them, and they in turn presumably would also show commitment to your business, and that's how you grow together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And from everything you've said, it really does seem like this sort of dual process is going to make sense in a lot of cases. But I actually want to ask you a couple questions about maybe some of these just individually, just so that employers have a little bit of a better handle. Um, with these temporary programs, there's a lot of things to consider. Just in general, what factors tend to limit an employer's ability to use these options effectively or to their fullest extent?
Sure. So, well, let's start with H-1B. It's been in the news a lot lately. So, the H-1B visa program, there is a limit to the amount that there of visas that there are every year. And there's a specific amount. Um, so there's a lottery. So each employer will register the interest of sponsoring an employee for an H-1B visa. And just to go back, an H-1B visa is to sponsor someone who is a skilled, like, professional worker. So you are sponsoring someone for a job or a position that would require, at a minimum, a bachelor's degree to qualify for that position. And so you register each person that you are interested in sponsoring on an H-1B or hiring on an H-1B visa um, annually in March. And then they host a lottery at the end of March. And then, if selected, then you go through the application process. And then at the end of the application process, if that is approved, then their first start date could be October 1st of that year. So it's kind of a long process, and it requires that person to be qualified, and for the position to be qualified, and for the employer to um, um, have the ability to pay the offered wage, and a couple of other sort of hurdles that have come up in addition to the numerical limitations. There's about a 1 out of 10 chance that you will be selected based on the number of people who are actually applying. But this year, there was an announcement that to hire an H-1B person, an employer would need to pay $100,000 um, for the ability to sponsor someone on an H-1B visa. Now, that is currently being challenged in the courts, and so we don't know yet if that will go into full effect. And it does appear that if it will apply, that $100,000 um, charge will apply only to hiring people um, who are coming outside the United States. But if you sponsor someone for an H-1B visa who is already in the United States, the employer would not be required. So that would be like hurdle number 1 to the H-1B visa program is considering whether you want to hire someone outside the United States or someone who is already in the United States. Either most of the time this is someone who is on an F1 or a student visa who's just finishing up like a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD program, who now wants to, continue their time in the United States by now utilizing their newly minted degree and working in the U.S. and they found someone to sponsor them, but they've got to go into the lottery. So there's numerical limitations. You're not guaranteed to have a job. You're going into a lottery. Then there's just this high price that you have to pay just for the ability to hire someone. So it's 100,000 for someone outside of the country on top of what you're paying them. And then they've changed the procedure as well in the last couple of weeks to say, okay, this is going to be a weighted lottery system now. So you pay, the more you offer to pay the person, the better chance that person will have to be selected in the lottery. So there's for each job opportunity, there's a certain what they call SOC code. Okay. And within each code, there's 4 different wage levels. Entry level is level 1, all the way up to a level 4, which is like, you know, you go up levels if you're a supervisor, or if you have travel, or if you have higher educational requirements or higher work experience requirements. There's certain things like where you're the cream of the crop that gets you to level 4, and you're getting paid more as you go along. So it's kind of similar to think, okay, if this is a lottery, well, people who are the entry level 1 getting offered the least amount of money might get 1 lottery ticket in the pot, whereas people at level 4 would be getting 4 lottery tickets in the pot. So they're going to have this better chance. So it's really entering the H-1B program this year. The challenges and barriers really relate to how much money um, employers will need to pay in order to sponsor the potential employees, the potential foreign employees. Um, and so I guess we're going to see how it plays out. What is really going to happen is that it will favor the larger companies, the Microsofts and the Googles and the Teslas of the world, who have the ability to pay those. And then it's going to limit the ability of the smaller and medium-sized firms to bring in the exceptional foreign talent, like for of the engineers, for examples, or the doctors, or that also are reliant on H-1B visas. So that's one. And then if you go into, for example, the H-2B, which are totally different sectors, um, and this is more geared towards the uh, construction industry, hospitality industry, fishing industry, forestry industries, um, and so on and so forth. Um, Again, the biggest challenge is on the numerical limitations. So again, there's only 66,000 of these visas every year, um, and it's split in the first half of the year gets 33,000, the second half of the year gets 33,000, but there's a demand for hundreds of thousands of these jobs. And so just getting selected is the biggest hurdle. Um, there is some relief and there are some strategies that you can take both in both of these industries though to get you outside of those caps to find cap exempt positions or cap exempt employees. And so there are things that you can do. These are the hurdles, but they're not insurmountable. And that's when you really want to discuss with a professional what strategies may work in a specific case for you um, to meet your need in a way that makes sense and in a way that can bring some predictability, some stability, and some retention. And there's other, I mean, we can go down the list on challenges, right? There's a ton of immigration challenges happening in the United States of America in 2026. Um, I don't know which types of challenges you'd like me to talk about because there's plenty, right? Um, and it's I see you want to say something.
I
Um,
mean, yeah, I was just going to say that I think you really hit the nail on the head with sort of that talk about the lottery, right? Because this concept of, a random selection process, it can be, maybe a little bit off-putting, the idea that you do everything right and you still don't get selected just based off of a random chance. But at the same time, knowing these types of things lets employers plan around it. Maybe you got to send out a couple more applications. Again, I can't really suggest anything, but definitely really insightful to hear from you. Just what these general challenges are. And now, if it's all right with you, I'd like to move a little bit away just from that short term and into the long term space for just a moment here. And now, for employers, having heard all this, you might be thinking, I want permanent sponsorship. Um, what early planning considerations tend to have the most significant impact on the long-term outcomes and the stability of your workforce?
I mean, permanent sponsorship is, certainly one of the most effective long-term retention tools available to employers. And I think that's really the goal is that when you find good workers, it's not necessarily about I mean, employers don't want to be scrambling every year to fill in the gaps of their workforce. They want to have a reliable, stable workforce. They want to be able to sign their contracts well in advance and know that they have people who can fill their contracts. And so early planning, certainly allows employers to shape roles thoughtfully, forecast wage growth, align immigration with promotions, leadership development. It allows them to take on these contracts and these projects and to build the company based on those, knowing that they have the workforce behind the growth. Um, and then, of course, employees sponsored for permanent residents will show higher loyalty and engagement in the business as well. Um, Essentially, what they need to do is just start early. And it's not necessarily about the early preparation. It's about actually committing to the process as early as possible, understanding that it will be a long-term process. Um, and there's multiple pathways to an immigrant visa. So the most common one is through the perm procedure, where it's an employer sponsored type of visa that can be either for EB3 or EB2. So either unskilled workers, as they're called, or skilled workers. So, I mean, an employer can sponsor anything from, a farm worker to a quarry worker, all the way up to a doctor and, an engineer and a lawyer and everything in between, right? Um, but the how long that process will take varies wildly depending on what the job is and also where the person who is being sponsored is from. So, sponsoring a lawyer from uh, Greenland is vastly different from sponsoring a lawyer from India or China. Or sponsoring a home care worker from the Philippines is vastly different from sponsoring a home care worker from the Netherlands, for example. So um, again, the idea is that you want to start the process. um, Similarly, there are shorter pathways that jump over the perm, and those are like self-sponsored permanent visas, and sometimes employers will help their employees sponsor themselves. Like with an EB2 and NIW, or a national interest waiver type of a visa. Those jump over the perm, and again, it's dependent upon how many visas there are available for that year in that category and where the person is from, but generally it's considered to be much quicker. Um, but even those are slowing down and facing higher scrutiny this year. And then there are pathways for citizenship, as for people who are investors in the United States, through a program called EB5, which may or may not, and then there's this Trump Gold Card, which includes large gifts to the United States to get a fast track um, to um, permanent residency. And so these all have different timelines, but because what that you're asking for is permanent residence into the United States, which allows you certain benefits um, of residency. You get to live and work freely in the United States. You don't have to leave at the end, like on the short-term visas, the alphabet soup type visas. You're not required to leave the US. Um, and you're not tied to a certain employer. You don't have an end date. You essentially get to just live freely and work freely in the US, and you get to sponsor family members to come into the US, and you have a pathway to citizenship to the US. So for all of those reasons, it's the process is slower and more thoughtful and more difficult. So you need to commit to the process. Of course, a lot of preparation needs to happen, but um, you also need to understand that because the process is a little bit longer, um, it's not going to be a line like this. It's going to be like this, and the requirements may change over time while you're in the middle of the process. So a little bit of flexibility also needs to be incorporated. There's preparation, and there's that is required, but there's also a lot of reliance on, just having a good practitioner who is guiding you through the journey. I always call it an immigration journey when I'm working with someone, because it really is like that. It's very rarely, I meet someone and then we go through an immigration process. You know, okay, let's get you a visitor visa, and then I never see you again. It's, I we start with an H-1B visa, and we go into the lottery. Now we've got the lottery. This is great. And then we're on the H-1B for, 2 years, and now we start their perm. And then a couple of years later, we apply for their adjustment of status. And then a couple years after that, we bring their family in. And now their family's all together. And then after they've had their green card for 5 years, now we're applying for naturalization. And before you know it, we've been with that employer and that employee for 10 to 15 years. And we've done like 10 different immigration processes for them, and and so it's a because there are so many options and so many pathways and so many things that are constantly changing about what's available to the employer and to the employee. We need to constantly be checking in to see what's now available, what new pathways are there, what has changed, what is no longer available, um, what's viable, what's non-viable, and then just continue as partners through the path, right?
Mhm. Absolutely. Just to make sure that I got that, it sounds to me like it isn't necessarily a case of early planning, which obviously needs to happen, but early action more so, right? That you're getting started on that pathway, like you said earlier, that salary, titles, all of these things are growing, and understanding that things are going to be changing, and that as these changes happen, the only thing you really can do is sort of roll with the punches, so to speak, and just make sure that you stay on top of everything.
Exactly. I mean, okay, perm is something I always tell my clients, right? Like with the perm, when you're sponsoring someone for a green card, you're not considering the role that they have now. You're considering the role that they will move into when they get the green card, which may be anywhere from 2 years from now to like 10 years from now. So in
Mhm.
that case, we need to build that future role, and that's very difficult for employers to be thinking about, because that's totally different from the H-1B, H-2A, H-2B, O-1, whatever it is that they are sponsoring them for in the short term. And when they consider the perm, and they create the job opportunity that exists today and not the future job opportunity, then there will be issues, because now 4 to 10 years down the road, that person has been promoted 6 times, but the job that they need to accept at the green card level is way below that now. And so then you have to start changing things, right? Um, or restart the process again down the road, and create the job opportunity that best matches the person at that time. Or, and so it's, but yeah, I mean, the idea is the longer you wait, the longer it'll take. And that's definitely true. There are more people now who are applying for um the permanent residence, employer sponsored permanent resident visas. And as a result, because the numerical limitations haven't changed, the timelines are getting longer. But again, that just requires strategic solutions from practitioners who know the space, and can help guide you along that line.
Absolutely. And now, with all that said, let's just say that you're a business and you're navigating a labor shortage for the first time. what are some, maybe not like a full business plan or recommendations because you can't give that, but what are some quick foundational steps and considerations that they should be aware of to approach the hiring of immigrants thoughtfully and avoid some of the common missteps?
So, what I always like to tell my clients who are just starting, like with their first foreign hire, is yes, I'm going to help you with hiring this person and figuring out what the best visa is for this person. And I'm going to help you through that whole guideline. But let's also think now about putting together what I like to call like an immigration employment policy, which would be similar to any other kind of HR document that you have. So, if you have a policy for how you accrue vacation days in your business, or how many sick days there are, or, how a person is, how people will be promoted, or how people get raises, or what are the KPIs, or any of this in your business. You also want to have a holistic immigration plan to consider. um are there minimum requirements for sponsoring an immigrant? What would you require of that person? What expenses will your business pay for? What expenses will you expect an employee to pay for? What will you it For the expenses that you want an employee to pay for, will you pay those costs and then ask them to repay you over time? Or do you want to have them pay them, and then then maybe you'll repay them? So it actually becomes a tool um, to attract top talent, if you have this consistency and you already know sort of what you can offer to immigrants. Because once you start an immigration program, you will see the benefits of it, and you will start attracting and growing a business that includes more foreign workers. And then in that case, you do want to have some consistency, and it's just much easier to have it from the beginning. And of course, you can always modify it. But what you don't, what I find some employers have trouble with in the beginning is not having this holistic, not having these conversations with their employees. And then as sort of the years go on, um, then it's like, did am I paying for that? Are you paying for that? Did we agree on this? I'm not sure. What and the good news is that you can budget for all of these things. And so that's what I like to do, is to say, okay, the perm might take us 4 years, but I can tell you now how much you'll need to pay in year one, and in year four, and in year two, and in year three, and in year four. So you can already budget over, 4-year time period, how much, and then make that a part of your annual budget for a 5-year business plan. And so it should really be thoughtful in terms of, not only what are the parameters of what sponsorship is going to be, what are the agreements between the employer and the employee, but then also having the budgeting for it so that there aren't any surprises, or that so you're ready to go to the next steps once they come.
So it's sort of similar to before. It's strategy and planning, strategy and planning, strategy. It just really just comes down to understanding what your options are, understanding specific needs, and then just acting based off of that. So for everyone joining us live, as you just saw, long-term immigration planning is most effective when aligned with professional growth, thoughtful preparation, and awareness of how employment-based pathways are evaluated. Staying informed can make a meaningful difference. If you're just joining us, welcome. Immigration Questions, a networking platform where users can ask immigration-related questions at no cost and engage directly with participating attorneys. We're also proud to share that Immigration Questions Better Business Bureau accredited and ISO certified, reflecting our commitment to transparency, accountability, community education, and security. Attorney Giacomazzi, based on your experience, how do platforms like Immigration Question help immigrants and immigration attorneys alike?
Well, I mean, I think that immigrationquestion.com it's a great platform because it's easily searchable, easily findable. If someone is an immigrant, or someone who is a foreign worker, or someone who has a friend and has an immigration question, or an employer has an immigration question and they Google it, then up comes this thing. And to connect information seekers with potential providers, experts in the field, um, is an amazing resource, because there aren't, it's very difficult to find someone. The immigration law is multifaceted, and not every immigration attorney is well versed in all the different types of immigration law. There's family immigration and business immigration and removal defense and this and that. So finding an attorney, finding a good attorney, and finding someone who is right for the type of question you're asking, it's a very difficult thing. Even for me, if I'm looking for someone um who does a type of immigration law that I'm unfamiliar with, I rely on my network. I put questions out there to my friends and colleagues. Does anyone know someone who's doing this? And Immigration Question does that for people, and so I think it's a great resource.
Thank you so much for the insight. We really do love to hear that our platform really helps immigrants and immigration attorneys alike. Now, I know we've been running for a little bit while. You have so much information to share with us, Attorney Giacomazzi. I got one more quick question for you before we jump into our Q&A, because I know some of our audience has some questions they really want answered. So if you don't
All
mind,
right,
I'll just
you gonna make it an
ask.
easy one for me?
I don't know if I can, unfortunately,
Uh
but
oh.
but if you can, go ahead and give us your perspective here. For the employers, after hearing all of this and still feeling pressure to hire quickly, what are the warning signs that they should be aware of that they might need to think, I should slow down, I should reassess my overall strategy before I go through with anything?
Look, I mean, there's no question that immigration hiring comes with complexity. There's strict timelines, detailed requirements, very little margin for error. But what we consistently see is that when employers plan early, they align immigration with their actual real workforce needs and treat it as a long term strategy and not sort of a last minute quick fix, then these types of people are still succeeding. The challenges are real, but so are the solutions. And with the right structure and expectation, immigration does remain one of the most effective tools employers have to build stable, reliable workforces in a tight labor market. The red flags would be trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. That is something I would not recommend. And you know going with someone who is offering a quick solution or an easy solution, um that would be a red flag to me. Or trying, there are risks that one can take, calculated risks that one could take that make sense in immigration, and then there are risks that just are not. For an example, um, I have, a law clerk, someone who just graduated from law school, and did not get in the H-1B lottery. And so he's saying, okay, I want you to do an O-1 visa for me. Well, O-1 visas are really meant for people who are outstanding in their field, who have won nationally acclaimed awards and prizes and have media attention for their, you know, national and international contributions in their field of law and have publications and in peer reviewed article journals and this and that. It's not for accountants and lawyers. I mean, as much as I like to think I'm outstanding in my field, and I am, I don't know if I would qualify for an O1, let alone someone who just, graduate. And so, but there will be people that will say, absolutely. I'll pay me 10,000 bucks and I'll file you an O1. Well, yeah. I mean, and so there are the qualifications are getting stricter these days, so it's not the time to if something sounds too good to be true, then it is. And so, when you're out there looking for an attorney, um, I would not go for the one who is saying all of the things that you want to hear. You do, you should be anticipating that there will be, complexities and there will be hurdles, but then, offering solutions to what those, you want a realistic assessment, I would say. And then I would caution against jumping into things that are just, a mismatch.
Yeah, it sounds like from what I've heard, getting these visas is not a quick process, and this immigration is
Oh,
probably
no.
not the minute band-aid that you're looking for. And then beyond that, if it sounds a bit too good to be true, it might well be.
Exactly. Yep.
All right, and with that, we're going to go ahead and move into our live Q&A. This is your chance to ask any questions directly to a licensed immigration attorney. You've seen her perspective, you've seen her experience. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat or call us live at 516-703-3483, where we're going to take as many as possible. Like I mentioned earlier, we're under a little bit of a time crunch, so we may only be able to get around the 2 or 3 of them. But if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to the attorney. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to take them from you. So, Zara Yarud Yara, wow, Yaradua, my apologies there. They're asking that they hear many companies cannot find enough workers. Which visa options exist if an employer wants to hire me temporarily?
Yeah, so that really exists on what business the company is in and what job they're trying to fill and what the minimum qualifications for that job are. And so without knowing that information, we can't necessarily say. So as mentioned, if it's someone looking for a software engineer, then the visa option would be an H-1B. Or if it's they're looking for lawyers, it would be an H-1B. But if it's someone who's looking for a cook in their hotel restaurant during this busy summer season, that would be an H-2B. Or if it's someone who is looking for camp counselors during summer camps, it might be a J1. So again, this is a very broad question, and it brings us back to a theme that's kind of been going throughout the thing, which is it's a very specialized inquiry that always starts with what is the job opportunity and what are the qualifications for the job opportunity, and that will really then inform which visa options are available for that employer to offer.
Thanks so much for that, Zara. Hopefully that gives you some insight there. Our next question is from Maitreyi, who would like to know if the $100,000 fee for H-1B visas will make employers less willing to sponsor workers.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the answer is it depends. In some cases, the larger companies like Google and uh uh Apple and Tesla and many of these other larger um organizations, um will not have an issue and will pay that in order to continue to bring in the top talent from around the world to fill their positions. But some of the smaller and medium-sized companies are really going to have to take into account what their immigration budget is year on year to see whether it's a financially viable decision for them. Um, I will just have to say with the caveat is that what we do know is that this first of all, the $100,000 fee is currently being challenged in the courts. So we don't know if it's actually going to be going into effect for in the 2026 fiscal year yet or not. And secondly, even if it does, it will apply for um, only for those who are being hired from outside of the country. So if people are inside the country on an F1 visa, um, studying in the US or on OPT, for example, um, and then are being sponsored on H1, then their employer will not have to pay this fee. Or if the person is already on an H1 and they're changing employer to another H1 or extending their H1, then they will not have to pay this fee. That is my understanding at this time. So, but yeah, I mean, I would have to imagine that certainly if there's a small or medium-sized business who has never sponsored foreign labor before and they see this big price tag, I would imagine that they would be much more hesitant to start the process. But you have to imagine that people don't sponsor foreign workers because, unless they truly um, need the workforce because they cannot find any qualified, willing, and able workers locally to fill these positions. And so, in that case, they may have to pay it in order to fill their positions in their company that they need filled.
Absolutely. So, can't really say anything for sure, but you know what I mean? Things are changing for sure. And now, unfortunately, this is going to be the last question because it's all we have time for. But Angela would like to know how their employer will prove that they tried to hire US workers, but they couldn't, which is why they're hiring her.
So, um, there are recruitment requirements, and it depends on the type of job, and the type of visa. But generally speaking, for different positions, there are certain recruitment requirements that each employer must go through. So they will, for example, um, post Sunday ads in newspapers. They will um, post jobs in the state workforce agency job um, uh, websites. They will put up, internal notices of that they are intending to hire a foreign worker for this position. Um, they can put stuff up on Indeed and Jobvertise and LinkedIn and this and that, and you collect all of that evidence that this recruitment has been done, and then you save it, and then if the Department of Labor or USCIS asks to provide that information, then we do, and you also save any and all of um, the resumes that you collected. And a lot of times, what the state workforce agencies will do is, I mean, they have these online um, uh, um, accounts where you register, and so Department of Labor has access to that to see if anyone contacted you online and if you contacted them back and if there were communications and if you discussed with them, the job opportunity and that sort of a thing. So there's plenty of ways in which, and it's very common But I can tell you that we almost never get anyone who is qualified, able, and willing to do the position. That's the whole reason why, the employers um are going through such an onerous, long,
Mhm.
detail oriented, um an expensive process. It's not to avoid hiring US workers. It's because there are no US workers who want to fill the job. That's it.
All right, Angela, hope that helped you out there. And now I do really have one more question for you. So, Attorney Giacomazzi, with the Trump administration recently announcing that hundreds, if not thousands, of federal immigration agents are being deployed to Minnesota, this is part of an expanded enforcement operation. What should employers and workers understand about how heightened enforcement priorities like this might affect immigrant communities and workplaces in 2026?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been seeing it, over the past almost 1 year now. And what you just need to be aware of first and foremost is your rights. So, what to do if they show up at the workplace, to know that, unless there's an actual judicial search warrant, then ICE is not allowed into any places that are not public. And so it's good to have, um, your workplaces clearly demarcated. What is a public area, such as the reception, and what are private work areas where, you know, people from off the street would not be expected to go. That's number one. And then, if you're unclear about what is happening, then you should always contact an immigration attorney who can then communicate with whomever happens to be at your workplace at that time, and then have the discussion. Um, and it's important to be compliant, right? And people who, again, who are trying to who are involved with hiring, immigrants and foreign labor, they're all just trying to do the right thing. But keeping good records, and being able to provide those documents within the amount of time required under the law, and doing internal audits, I would say, of I-9s, making sure that everything is up to date. The best defense is a good offense, or what's the way to say it, but the idea is just to make sure all of your ducks are in a row, and to make sure that you everything is lined up, and to understand that you have rights, um and to ensure that everyone is compliant, including the law enforcement officers who may be coming to your workplace, um and that nothing needs to happen immediately, that you can slow down the process and ask for representation, and then take it from there. And I work a lot with compliance audits and investigations, and and you know I would, yeah, I guess that's it. It's all about just ensuring that your paperwork is put together, and being well prepared for if someone does come.
Absolutely. Stay ready, stay informed, and make sure that you know what your rights are, if I heard you there correctly.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Attorney Mia Giacomazzi, for sharing your time and insights today. Your perspective helps clarify a complex area that many employers are struggling to navigate. To everyone watching, thank you for joining today's webinar. We sincerely hope that this discussion provides practical guidance as you explore temporary and permanent visa options to address labor shortages. You can always visit immigrationquestion.com to ask any immigration-related questions and stay informed about upcoming discussions. If you want to revisit today's session or share it with colleagues, the full replay will be available on Spotify soon. Just search Borderless Talk by immigrationquestion.com. Join us on Friday for another live conversation covering key immigration updates and workforce strategies. Attorney Giacomazzi, thank you once more so much for your time, your insight, and your perspective here. You just provided a wealth of knowledge that I think people will absolutely.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And then for the audience at home, until then, stay informed, stay connected.
Okay, have a great day.
Thanks so much, Attorney Giacomazzi. Goodbye.